Welcome to Module 9. I am going to be a little bit repetitive on this particular session because so many students do not do the final paper well. They leave out sections and that costs them a lot of points. So I'm going to be repetitive. Let me first start, however, with Module 8. In Module 8, you needed to address cultural sensitivity, which included the impact of color, direct and indirect communications, women in the workforce, and gestures. Gestures can mean many different things in many different cultures. You needed to look at advertising in the US and one other country. You needed to explain the ads, provide a rationale for cultural differences, and show examples. Not everyone provided a rationale for the cultural differences or explained the ads. Make sure you do that in the final paper. Messaging. You needed 2 HR messages, one for the US and one for another country. Several people did not do an HR issue. Some did a product launch. Some had the only cultural issue was who it came from or changing currency. That is not enough of a cultural issue. You need to be looking at culture, the way people talk to each other, the way they communicate. And you needed a rationale for the cultural differences in your HR messages. Again, some people left the rationale out of the discussion question. Cultural sensitivity is incorporated into the final paper. Be sure you write 2 different messages, not based on senders or currency or colleges. Justify the cultural differences, include 2 different ads. I would put the messages and the ads in the appendix and explain the cultural differences. Module 9, you're going to be looking at brand values. You're going to select an ad, discuss its consistency with the brand values, use at least 1 source, reply to 2 peers and 1 can be to me, and Module 9 is also incorporated into the final paper. Discussion 9 is incorporated into the final paper. I cannot emphasize enough that discussion boards 4, 6, 8, and 9 are added to the final paper. It is not just milestones 1, 2, and 3. Don't procrastinate. If you haven't already started, you should be starting. This is a bear of a paper to pull together. It's worth 350 points, which means the late deduction is 35 points. As said, it is due on Sunday. So some information on writing. This is repetitive, but it's important because this is why people lose points. I'm going to be talking about citations, headings, references, sources, best practices, and I'll provide you a sample of a reference listing. Writing. Do not use you, your, first person, or contractions. Do not use you, your, first person, or contractions. Paraphrase rather than quote. Quoting tells me you can find a quote. Paraphrasing shows me that you can apply information, analyze information, and it's much better at the graduate level. Avoid superlatives, every, all, never, always. These are rarely true and difficult to prove. You don't know that a company will never do something because you can't predict the future. You may not know that they did something in the past. You can't say they've always done something. You can't say that everyone in the world loves Apple. There are some people that an Apple product is their entire annual income. Very is an overused and unnecessary adjective. Avoid it. Do not use in order to, use to. Do not use due to the fact that, use since. Nowadays should be today. Avoid generalities, like the entire world says this, everybody believes this. And don't tell me that your idea is great. Tell me it's an idea, tell me it's a way, tell me it's an approach, but don't use the word great. It's overused and an unnecessary adjective. Check your use of the apostrophe. Companies, apostrophe S means belonging to the company. Companies, IES is the plural, meaning more than one company. And that is on a lot of different things. It's with employees too. Avoid unnecessary phrases, for instance, when it comes to, as well as. Don't end sentences with a preposition, for instance, to, in, on. Rhetorical questions are not a good practice in business writing. Use the author for publication if you're writing according to. It is never according to the journal unless there is no author. Check for wordos, cliches, and redundancies. I'm going to go over those more in detail in a minute. And try to avoid starting sentences with the word also or a numeral. Wordos. These are words that are spelled correctly, but they are the wrong word. Right now, I am experiencing some really awful weather. And whether or not I lose power is a question for me. Those are two different uses of the word weather. It's amazing to me how many mangers work in companies. There and there is often misused. Another one that I see a lot is then and than, lose and loose. So make sure you check it. Cliches are things like last but not least, first and foremost, easier said than done, in this stage and age, the issue or the task at hand. Read between the lines. There are so many different cliches, so please be careful of them. They add no value to your paper. Redundant expressions, extremely unique. Unique means there's nothing else like it, so what would extremely mean? Something is necessary or it's needed, it's not both. New innovation, the connotation is that it's new, so that's redundant. Past history, history really means in the past, so you don't need both words. Two twins actually means four people, twins means two. Completely unanimous, unanimous means everyone agreed, so how could it be any more than everyone? Citations, use last name only and publication date in the citation. Do not use initials. If you do not have a publication date that you do not see on what you are using, you do not use the download date. You use N period D period, which means no date. And it is better to find articles with a publication date because otherwise you have no idea how old the article is. Most publication dates are at the top, but sometimes you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom to see it. If you have used a citation that is a quote, you must add the page or paragraph number. And if it is a quote, a citation is not enough. It must be in quotation marks, or it can be considered plagiarism. If you only have two authors, you have to use both authors' names in every citation and on the reference page. If you have three or more authors, you have to use all the authors in the first citation and on the reference page. And in citations, you can use et al., which means and others. So if I had three authors, green, black, and yellow, on the second citation, I could use green et al., and you use all authors in the reference list. Use the first citation for three or more. Use the citation for any information that is new to you. You read it in researching the topic. Paraphrased information has to be cited. Summarized information has to be cited. Citations are not just for quotes, and sources should be used for more than just finding quotes. If you didn't write it, you must cite it. You need to use at least three main centered headings. I will give you my suggested headings, but the first suggested heading is for the first paragraph. Use title of the paper. Introduction is not used as a heading in APA. Make each content requirement a heading, and you need a final heading for the summary or conclusion. Your heading should be 3 to 5 words based on the topic. Don't use the directions, don't use a sentence, don't use a question as the heading. And capitalize all the main words in the heading. Don't use a level 2 heading unless you've used a level 1 heading. Level 1 is main, centered, bold. Level 2 is in the margin, bold. You can use level 1 headings throughout the paper. In the sample paper, I do use level 2 headings. Introduction is not used as a heading. Your, first person, and contractions are not used. You must use a level 1 before a level 2. You have to use a level 2 before a level 3. Citations and references must match. What I do when I'm reviewing your papers is I go to the reference page, I use the find tool, and I look up to see if your citation is in the paper. If your first word doesn't match the citation, I'm not going to find it. That's why another reason why citations and references must match. Sample paper. I used APA formatting. I showed you the cover page. I used header, which is the page number. headings, and citations and references. Everything else is filler text. I know I'm being repetitive, but these are the things that people keep missing. Match your citation and references. You cannot list a source as a reference if it's not cited. Use the publication date, not download date. If there's no date, it's N period, D period. Write the titles of books and journals in italics. You do not use the words volume, issue, or pages, and I'll show you that in a minute. And you list your references alphabetically. And if the authors are green, black, and yellow, green is the first one listed. That is how your reference is done. You do not change the order of authors because it has meaning as to who contributed the most. Okay, here are my samples for you. You list a reference page alphabetically. You don't say what type of reference it is. I'm just doing that to show you for demonstration purposes. There's a website with no author. There's a website with an author and date. There's an article from a journal, and I have highlighted 96, 142 to 145 to demonstrate that 96 is the volume, the 1 in parentheses is the issue number, and 145 to 142, 142 to 145 are your page numbers. The words volume, issue, and pages are not used. And you can see other examples there too. Don't use Google unless it is a starting point. Google very quickly gets you into blogs, which are unacceptable sources, sites selling their services, which are unacceptable sources, and purchase paper sites, which are definitely unacceptable sources and can get you into trouble for plagiarism. Be careful using the cheat sites. Dictionaries and encyclopedias are good for high school, not for college. And those purchase paper sites can catch you if you don't know how to recognize them. And most of the time, there aren't tips because these purchase paper sites change their names constantly. The 4C filter, I've mentioned this before, is your paper clear? Can I follow your train of thought? Is it well organized? Is it concise? Does it make the point without unnecessary words and phrases? I'm much more interested in your content than your word count. If you can say it in 5 words, don't say it in 15. Comprehensive, are all of the requirements addressed? And is it cogent, based on evidence, also known as sources? Best practices, do not just report on a topic, apply and analyze it. Demonstrate that you understand what you're talking about. Use sources to support key points. Start with an introduction, which overviews the topics, not the paper. End with a summary or conclusion. And this is probably the most important tip. Read it aloud before submitting to find mistakes that you will not find if you read it silently. Make sure you eliminate redundancies. There were redundancies from milestones 1, 2, and 3. Combine all the sections into one paper. Implement the corrections and improvements from your previous papers. Do not make the same mistakes. Move your messages and illustrations to appendices. Make sure your citations and references match. Confirm that all required sections are included. Do not leave out the information from discussion boards 4, 6, 8, and 9. Make sure you review your feedback from 8 because several of you need to make adjustments for the final paper. Check APA formatting and guidelines and add those sections. All right, so the final paper, you're starting with the background of the products, the market, and brand 1. That is from milestone 1. You are then going into the poor working conditions, which is from milestone 2. You're combining internal and external into one section. You're talking about the type and purpose, which is inform, educate, and persuade. Your target audience and how you are communicating with them and why that target audience was selected and why that method of communication. Your draft communications, internal and external, go to the appendix. Brand, legal, and compliance issues for the working conditions is added. It's from discussion board 4. Your next main topic is discrimination in the workplace. Again, it's internal and external. And again, it's type and purpose. This time you're adding offensive or defensive strategy. Offensive is proactive. It means nothing has happened and you've implemented a new policy. And defensive is reactive. It means something's gotten out that is bad news. You're also going to be talking about inform, educate, and persuade. Same with the target audience. You're also putting in the method of communication. If you are using a press release for either of the external communications, make sure you use the press release format. Press release format is not used internally. Your draft, again, is going to the appendix, and your brand, legal, and compliance are being added from discussion board 6. You're adding the international differences or cultural sensitivity from discussion board 8. It's 2 HR communications for the US and another country. Make sure it is an HR issue. You're not translating it into another language. And consider cultural differences, not things, again, like who's sending it, the currency, the holidays, the schools. You want it to be about the culture and explain and justify the different messages. External, you are having 2 sample ads, not everyone included the sample ads in DB8. Analyze the advertising differences and provide a rationale for the messages. You're also going to be adding the information from DB9, which is about target market and brand values. And again, you're sharing sample ads, and those can go in the appendix, and you have 1 summary for the entire paper. These are the APA headings. You can see that I have used level 1 and level 2. I start with the name of the company. You will notice that is not bold. I have poor working conditions, which is internal and external. My subheadings are type and purpose, target audience, brand, legal, and compliance implications, workplace discrimination, internal and external, type and purpose, offensive or defensive, and why, target audience and method of communication, brand, legal, and compliance from DB6. International differences, there's internal and external. Then for target market and brand values, I separated those out, but you could just use one heading for that section. Summary, references, and then appendices. Here are my suggested appendices. Appendix A is the internal working condition message. B is the external working conditions. C is internal discrimination message. D is external discrimination. E is the US and foreign HR messages. And F is the US and foreign ads. Make sure you use the press release format. The sample paper has also been added to this week. Actually, the press release format, the sample paper, I will repost this week. Be sure any messages come from individuals. Internal should come from a high level. External press releases do not come from the CEO. Write different messages for internal and external. Review papers. Do not make mistakes for the same issues, and read aloud. Sample paper, take out the filler text. It outlines the paper for you. It ensures that all requirements are covered, and there are note pages, there are notes to you in red that is not filler text. Please review that. Ask for help, not because you're weak, because you want to remain strong. If you need help, please ask, and ask before 10 o'clock next Sunday night. Sometimes the questions are complicated, but the answers are usually simple. That's it for this week. I wish you all the best in completing this long, difficult paper. I know it's pulling together stuff you've already done, but it does take some time, so I hope you will start early in the week and ask if you have questions.